Is the microphone working? I think we should start. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pacific Day 2016. My name is Murray Hebert. I work for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I work on the Asia team there. It's a real delight to have been asked again to moderate this forum. I think most of you know that the Pacific Day is organized by the Washington Pacific community, which includes the embassies and the various offices of the Pacific Island countries and states and territories represented in Washington and New York. Pacific Day started back in the 1990s and has been going since. It's really intended to showcase ideas, food, and culture from the Pacific Islands here in Washington, D.C. This year, we're particularly fortunate that a large group of leaders have come to Washington to participate in Secretary John Kerry's organized our Ocean Forum, which is going to be held tomorrow and on Friday. To kick off our event this afternoon, it's a real delight to welcome the President of the Federated States of Micronesia, His Excellency Peter Christian, who just last week hosted the annual Pacific Island Forum back home and then came here for this. Peter, His Excellency President Christian was, before he became president, had a variety of jobs, but he began his career in 1979 as the youngest ever elected member to Congress. He has been also elected as Speaker on at least 2 occasions, and he has served as Secretary of Resources and Development, among other jobs. President Christian, please.
Thank you, MC, and thank you for that warm applause. Could we hear that one more time? Thank you very much. I have been president for just a year and 4 months, and as you can imagine, I'm having difficulty being a president. And these good folks are trying to teach me the proper ways of being president, and they're making some progress. And very recently, by decision of people I did not know, the Pacific Island Forum was recently held in Pohnpei in the Federated States, and as such, as president of that country, he sits and be the chairman. And so I am almost 2 weeks into this job. And so, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a good afternoon. As I was driving over earlier, I regretted having listened to the people who are molding me to be president and got me into a coat and tie. So I quickly went back and unprecedented myself. Today is a wonderful day where we get together amongst ourselves and just be Pacific about ourselves and about our issues. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable dignitaries who are gathered here, I've always wanted to come to this gathering, and I've never had an opportunity until today. And I'd like to tell you how happy I am to be here, but not very happy to be delivering a speech. I titled my short remarks today, Oceans in Washington, just to carry me over to tomorrow, because it is really difficult for a Pacific person to talk about the Pacific without saying ocean, or to say Pacific Ocean without thinking about fish, fishing, or reef and reef fishing. And so throughout my remarks, you will note that this remark is not organized. Indeed, it is not organized well because I had to go through it earlier this morning. But because Pacific Islands are small and far apart, the leaders recognized the need to be together in order to be strong as one. much like the small fish in the ocean. And if you have fished in the ocean like I have done, you will note that oftentimes you'll find the small fish gather and form to become and look like a larger fish or a larger object, that even the sharks would come and shy away from this large object. And so we need to know and remember that even the small fish of the ocean has unity in their minds. This fish depend on the ocean, and we also depend on the ocean for our livelihood. And we see the obvious, that the ocean needs help. And we see, and we are doing our best individually as small nations, but also together as a community of Pacific Island countries. Pacific leaders, under the auspices of the Pacific Islands Forum, came together again last week in Pohnpei for their annual summit, but also to continue their work toward redirecting the trend of events and actions that have contributed to the poor health of our planet Earth, the deterioration of the quality of our ocean, and in general, the damages to Pacific Islands communities whose shores border the Pacific Ocean. But even united, the leaders of the Pacific Island Forum countries recognized the enormity of the task. One presenter said, and I remembered that from the discussions, that what we are trying to do is like turning the Titanic with the canoe paddle. Yes, the challenges are big. The issues and dangers that the small island states face by the adverse effect of climate change posed a titanic challenge to even our collective effort. But we are encouraged, though, by the worldwide participation at this forum in Pohnpei, in addition to the wide representation of countries at Palikir. For those of you who don't know, Palikir is the capital in which the FSM has established its capital complex. A little commercial here, and a word of thanks to UNESCO. We are happy to again say that the Nanmadol ruins located in Pohnpei have been inducted into the World Heritage List, and we are happy for that. And we are not just happy for it. We'd like for you to come, spend some money in Pohnpei and go see these ruins. Thank you. That was good. The people who gathered in Pohnpei last week, even though we were encouraged by the worldwide participation at this forum, we wanted to highlight the fact that more than just the countries that came, all the way from Europe, the United States, the big island of Australia, and the not so big island of New Zealand, both of these Pacific Island countries joined the small little countries in this gathering in Pohnpei to continue their work and their effort toward putting together a meaningful effort toward mitigating some of the climate change effects that have become real on the islands in the Pacific. I'd also like to say that the encouragement that we had was really because as a Pacific initiative, when we started, it was to fend off for ourselves in the Pacific what has become a very dangerous occurrence in our world. But we are encouraged. I like that part of the speech where I stop and everybody stop. I was wondering, what is this guy thinking right now? Actually, I was lost in my speech. And I thank you for coming in because that makes my pause more meaningful. Thank you, Foreign Minister. As I said, we are very encouraged that what had started as a Pacific initiative to fend off for ourselves in the Pacific has now become a call of the wild, a call to all and a call to none in particular. What was just us is now all of us. What was for the Pacific is now for all the oceans. Much more is still needed, and many more must join. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are of the Pacific, part of the Pacific, I say let us kneel and be thankful that those who have come to our aid have come. And we pray that those who are still resisting that there is indeed climate change will eventually join us. Those of you who live far away from home, like here in Washington, we would like for you to know about the ongoing strength in our unity building between the small and the big, between the less fortunate and the more fortunate, those at sea level and those who have never set foot in the Pacific waters. We must all be thankful, and I ask you to please join me in remembering them on the next time you put your hands together to pray. This is very important to all of us, the Pacific people, whose culture it is to always say thank you. I'd like also to touch on the issue of unity. Unity is key to our success in overcoming what challenges us as individuals, and unity is nothing new. The first form of unity for survival that I can recall was when Adam asked Eve out on their first date. That to me was the first unity effort. And of course, they noticed that the beasts of the wild sort of was in fear of a larger form, mass form of two rather than one. And so started unity as an effort to ward off the bad. Maybe I should move this up so I don't lose it. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to be different today. I'd also like to say that unity, the leaders think, is key to the success of what we are trying to do. What challenges us as individuals, we must collectively respond to as a team. Today, we see much of this effort at unity. Defense alliances, global business partners, Union of Nations, including our own organization of the Pacific Islands Forum as a unity for forceful action against possible extinction of our oceanic cultures and communities. There is a Pohnpeian saying, "Angin kelap," which translates into English as the spiritual power of many. This hints at the core and essence of your leaders, who have been relentless in their effort to help save the Earth by helping to heal the cancer that threatens our Pacific Ocean. I note with interest that scientists who spend time looking out into the wilderness of the galaxy have found a planet that they say may be habitable, like our Earth. But 2 days after the announcement of the discovery, some of you may remember, a newspaper presented us with a cartoon of two creatures on that new planet. They were looking through a telescope at planet Earth and commented, "Just make sure those creatures on that planet don't come to ours." Maybe they mean, look what they have done to Earth. Pacific Islands leaders have become obsessed in their effort to help save our planet, our oceans, and their Pacific. I ask you to join us in this noble obsession, an obsession by leaders to do the right thing at the most crucial time for us and for our Earth, for a greater cause, for a just reason. As populations go, we are of little consequence to the world, but as a people, we are known as Micronesians, Melanesians, and Polynesians, inhabitants of small Pacific islands for thousands of years with cultures unique to us. This must mean something to us, and it is our solemn duty to not simply keep it alive, but insist that for it we become more relevant to the world. Kalangan and Kupur Chorus, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, President Christian, for kicking off our Pacific Day here today. Our next speaker is His Excellency Rimbink Pato, who is the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Papua New Guinea. He hosts his country, Papua New Guinea, was involved in hosting the Pacific Island Forum last year, so we have quite a bit of continuity here. So the foreign minister has served in his post since August 2012. He's also a lawyer by profession and owns his own law firm called Steele Lawyers. So, Mr. Minister, please.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony. Just one correction there. I don't own the law firm Steele's Lawyers anymore because we are required by law to serve one employer, and so I serve the independent state of Papua New Guinea for and on behalf of the citizens of my country. Having said that, Your Excellency Peter Christian, President of the Federated States of Micronesia and current Chair of the Pacific Islands Forum, colleague foreign ministers of the Pacific Island Forum nations, the Honourable Maggie Berry, Minister of Conservation of New Zealand, His Excellency Ambassador Kyoto, Ambassador of Palau and head of the diplomatic corps here in Washington, D.C., our ambassadors from the Pacific Islands to the United States of America, our ambassadors to the UN in New York, Madam McTaylor, the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, colleague and friends of the Pacific Islands, and of course, special tribute to the senior officials of the administration of the United States State Department who were here with us at the luncheon hosted by Tim Grosja, the New Zealand ambassador to the US, and with whom we've had very interesting and constructive discussions. Thank you very much for the leadership of the US in this area. Of course, taking the cue from the statement by His Excellency the President, we all agree that the oceans feeds billions of people, employs millions of workers, and generates trillions of dollars in the world economy. At the recently concluded Pacific Islands Conference of Leaders meeting in Hawaii, then Chair of the Pacific Islands Forum and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, the Honourable Peter O'Neill, informed President Barack Obama, who met with them at that conference, that the number one issue on the minds of the Pacific Island leaders is climate change. People and communities in the Pacific are in grave danger, and countless lives are threatened by extreme weather brought about by climate change, and our leaders are demanding action, as our Prime Minister told the Conference of Pacific Island Leaders. Apart from climate change and weather conditions, unsustainable and overfishing also threatens the economic well-being and livelihood of all of our peoples, and more particularly Pacific Island nations. Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that approximately 30% of the world's fisheries are being fished at biologically unsustainable levels, and approximately 58% are already being fully fished at maximum levels with no room to grow any further. Fisheries subsidies estimated to be just under 40 billion annually and growing, create significant fishery market distortions, and is a major factor contributing to overfishing, overcapacity, and the depletion of fishery resources in our area, particularly in the Pacific, as we are the children of the ocean. Conserving and sustainably managing our fisheries is an urgent challenge facing the international community, and more particularly the Pacific Island states. To address this concern, Papua New Guinea, together with Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, the United States, and Uruguay, are considering action with the goal of eliminating harmful subsidies, including those subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity, and subsidies linked to illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU, fishing. We are working together to begin preparing for negotiations in the WTO to eliminate harmful fisheries subsidies. This is a point which I sought to make in the discussions we had over lunch. And as part of the WTO negotiations, we'll be seeking the support of WTO members to enhance cooperation to help developing small island countries to strengthen their capacity to implement subsidy disciplines. The objective, of course, is to work with each other and with like-minded participants to conclude an ambitious high standard agreement while at the same time working with all WTO members to make progress towards a multilateral agreement in the WTO, because as we know, whatever the agreement we come to at the end must be compliant with the fundamentals of the WTO framework. This initiative will result in significant trade, economic development, and environmental benefits, and help put us on track towards achieving Target 14 of the UN Sustainable Goals, for which we thank the US and many of the countries who supported the Pacific Islands on it in September of last year, and which calls for prohibition of fisheries and subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity by 2020. I would urge the US and other WTO member countries to join this initiative to eliminate harmful subsidies in the fisheries sector, and instruct our officials in the WTO to work in getting a draft agreement in place before the next WTO ministerial. Obviously, we have the evidence from which we can move forward, particularly together, this group, with the support of countries like the US. We put in place the COP21 agreement in Paris last year, which will come into force very soon. So there is already a track in the international arena on the basis of which we can move forward. And therefore the United States support is once again critical in this endeavor to ensuring there is sustainable fish stock in maintaining our closer economic relations fostered in the fishery sector beyond the life of the current multilateral fisheries treaty between the United States and certain of the Pacific Islands countries. With those comments, I thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Pato. Our next speaker is the Honorable John Silk, who is the Foreign Minister for the Republic of the Marshall Islands. He has served in this capacity since February of this year, but this is he's served twice earlier as the Foreign Minister between 2009 and 2012. He's also served as Minister of Resources and Development. Minister Silk.
Thank you. President Christian, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings and yake from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. I also have the pleasure to bring forward to spare the strength and regional unity from the recent meetings, including the Pacific Islands Forum in the Federated States of Micronesia and our Pacific Islands Conference of Leaders Summit in Honolulu, Hawaii. We welcome the policy rebalance of the United States, which has provided a renewed engagement with Pacific Island nations, with a view towards mutual interest in security and stability, as they call it, a Pacific pivot, is a clear opportunity to engage more closely with the core drivers of our nations. It is a true mark of character that not only did President Obama seek to meet with our leaders in the Pacific, in his own home and state of Hawaii, but that he took the time afterward to visit Midway Atoll and to see with his own eyes what atoll nation leaders and what small island leaders see every day. The United States, in many things, a vast geography and a strong array of military and diplomatic power expanding across the world. But for a moment, and perhaps far more than is often realized, President Obama underscored that the United States is also, in its own way, a Pacific nation. Perhaps our first priority may be on what has also captured the attention of many this week in Washington, our ocean. This inverse geography takes true accounting of our regional footprint, that we define ourselves not just by the size of our populations, but the vast areas between our political boundaries, biodiversity, and natural resources, including minerals and fisheries. I welcome Secretary Kerry's personal leadership on oceans, and given that the United States Pacific Fisheries Treaty has now been negotiated, we encourage the U.S. to rescind its withdrawal, join the agreement to allow 2017 allocations of efforts, and consider means to further support all FFA nations, and in particular, the parties to the Nauru Agreement. Our leaders have asked for policy coherence on this matter, and in short, from our perspective, this could well come to a choice between the U.S.'s own immediate commercial interest and the long-term growth and stability of our region. It is time that we capture the global momentum on sustainable oceans set forward by Secretary Kerry and apply this together in the Pacific tuna fisheries to use sustainable practices as a benchmark to avoid a backdoor shift of U.S. domestic efforts into its Pacific territories. It is high time to walk the talk in our outcomes in the region, as much as we can talk the talk in Washington. Moving beyond our oceans, we also welcome the U.S. commitment to provide our region with targeted climate change finance at bilateral and community levels, but also encourage the U.S. to engage with both multilateral sources and other bilateral partners to define modalities that work to bring ultimate change to finance more directly to small island communities that are at the front line of climate change. This goes well beyond merely flooding our small island nations with more distant multilateral commitments, but working closely in partnership to define innovation and creative strategies that are truly island tailored. It is not at all difficult to realize that our well-being, our footing as trade partners, and our means to provide security and stability in the face of rising pressure are all related to our ultimate resident future, to a climate resident future. We are pleased to lend wide support from the Pacific for entry into force the Paris Agreement this year as soon as possible, and towards strong action on the phase down of harmful HFCs gases under the Montreal Protocol. North Pacific nations, the freely associated states, have our pathways with the U.S., and those are also ones in need of clarification. But there is no North or South in the Pacific Islands Forum. We all aspire to an ever stronger common Pacific voice. As the U.S. moves forward into a new Pacific age, it is imperative that we also all acknowledge that our deep history, which reaches back to World War II and the Cold War eras. And in this regard, I must underscore that the unanimous decision of the forum leaders to bring to the U.S. attention its own role in addressing ongoing impacts of nuclear testing in the Pacific and the Marshall Islands in particular. Our leaders in Honolulu, as well as in the Pacific Island Forum in Ponape, have provided ministers and ambassadors with a clear and unified Pacific voice, including on mutual priorities with the United States. In particular, it is imperative that we vocalize a common regional assistance platform in the areas of trade, energy, etc. It is important that we all build on the positive momentum of leaders and explore the means to turn word into realities and pinpoint the areas where further engagement, political will, and creative thought is needed. I'm also pleased to address you all at a time of such engagement and activity, and look forward to taking the Pacific voice towards an effective U.S. engagement. Como dada, as we say in our language, and in English we say thank you.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Silk. We're going to adjust the schedule just a little bit and switch to the speaker from Palau next. Our speaker is Mr. Umiich Sengebau, who is the Minister for Natural Resources, Environment, and Tourism in the Republic of Palau. He's served in that role since February 2013. And this gives him the responsibility to protect and develop Palau's natural resources. He's also oversees the implementation of Palau's tourism policy of targeting high-value tourism and new tourism destination brand of Pristine Paradise Palau. Please.
Your Excellency, President Christian, ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna maybe tell a bit of a story about the conservation efforts in Palau and how we're linking it to our tourism industry. But more importantly, I'd like to maybe talk about the conservation efforts using the term bright spots, and then before I delve into that subject, I'm using the word bright spot, and this is from a book called Switch. I'm not sure how many of you have actually read this book, and I think it's an important and it's a really good book that if you have a chance to read it. And very quickly, I like to tell that story because I think it sets the context of how our conservation efforts have actually sort of the modern conservation effort has sort of developed over the years. So basically, from that book, there's this gentleman that works for Save the Children organization that was actually contracted to look at the malnutrition in Vietnam. Of course, when he went there, the conventional wisdom is poverty, poor sanitation. Well, that's the widespread malnutrition. So he went around and actually asked around, are there any children that are doing okay? Well, he found out there are children that are actually not malnourished. So he asked the question of why are they not malnourished? Apparently the parents have adopted better ways to actually feed their children by, instead of traditionally feeding them twice a day, the mothers actually divided the meals taken to 4 times a day because the children are not able to absorb the food if it's twice a day. And they were able to pick some shrimps and other vegetables to sort of supplement the diet. So basically, I think the book talks about that you shouldn't solve problems, you should actually copy success. I think at times, of course, if you're in a nuclear plant and there's a bell ringing, of course you would go there and try to find out. But I think in real life it's about changing attitude. And about changing attitude, if your child comes home with a report card that has A's and B's and maybe a few more C's and D's, you might want to start with that A and B and ask the question, why are they doing okay in those classes? And then maybe try to replicate that success in other. And so in that context, I want to share that in 1998, Palau's reefs was actually devastated from the El Nino event. 50% of our corals actually died. In some areas, 90% mortality. So when we actually looked at our corals, we went around and we looked at which areas were actually not bleached, which areas did not die. And that really set what they call the transforming coral reef conservation. And they start coining the terms resilient and resistant sites. Because it is those areas that you want to protect. So in case you have those future events, that there'll be the seed banks to so it took us actually 10 years for our reefs to recover, and because of those resilient and resistant sites. And so in 2003, Palau passed its protected areas network, and we were able to protect those critical areas to ensure our conservation efforts to this day. We also implemented what we call the green fee, which actually, that for every tourist that are coming to Palau, we impose an additional $15 tax that actually goes into the conservation efforts and funding critical conservation work in Palau. Our tourism industry has really basically doubled in the last 4 years, from 80,000 tourists a year to nearly 170,000 in the last 4 years. If you can believe it or not, we have 12 different airlines that are flying to Palau. More recently with All Nippon Airlines that just recently started flying to Palau. And so our tourism industry is good, but that's also posing a lot of challenges for us in terms of depleting our reefs, basically over-harvesting of fish. And so I think it is in this context that the Palau National Marine Sanctuary also came about. That yes, it's important to protect the biodiversity aspect of this National Marine Sanctuary, but more importantly, addressing the food security issue. And so we wanted to ensure that we're taking some of that fish, instead of being, as soon as it's harvested, some of the best fish that get harvested on our long line industry get shipped up off island, and whatever what they call the rejects or grade C actually gets to stay in Palau. But even those grade C are not enough to feed the number of tourists that are there. And so part of the whole initiative that we're doing is ensuring that we're taking some of those fish from our exclusive economic zone, ensuring that we're feeding the tourists and the growing number of tourists and also the local population, and to give some relief to our reef conservation. I think it's important that we look at the bright spots across the Pacific, and I can stand here and say that we should, as Pacific Islanders, look to those bright spots. There was, I think a lot of our conservation effort has been based on our traditional, that there's a saying that we sometimes go far and wide to learn that the very answers to our problems are right at home. And I think we as Pacific Island people have learned to live in harmony with our environment, and so we can learn a lot. We can learn so much from learning from those bright spots that we have. And I know that we can learn so much from the experience of the marshes in terms of dealing with climate change for many years. I think some of those traditional practices, I believe, could help us to address many of the challenges that we're faced. And so I think it is in this context that I believe that we should look to see what are those bright spots to help us really help advance in our efforts going forward as a community of nations. Thank you very much.
Mr. Sengebau, thank you very much. Our next speaker is going to is from Vanuatu, but he unfortunately the minister Bruno Leingkone has been called to another meeting, but his political advisor Charles Linney will deliver the minister's remarks. Mr. Linney, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have great pleasure today, especially to speak on behalf of my minister, on behalf of my and our country, Vanuatu. Firstly, I would like to thank the New Zealand Embassy for organizing this important event. This event is important because it brings us together to discuss our common issues, and is also providing us an important opportunity to know each other. As you all know, Vanuatu has overgone major challenges over the last few years. Vanuatu was devastated by Cyclone Pam and caused damages that were worth in excess of 60% of our economy. As Cyclone Pam is demonstrated and has demonstrated, Vanuatu is extremely vulnerable to external shocks, and these shocks are beyond Vanuatu's control to manage. In the recent 2015 World Risk Index, 4 of the Pacific Island countries are listed in the top 10 of the table of the world's riskiest countries in natural disasters. Vanuatu is at the top of that list. Climate change and the unpredictable weather patterns remains a threat for Vanuatu to achieve its sustainable development goals in the longer term. Therefore, the implementation of the Paris Agreement and Sendai framework for disaster risk management remains vital. Also, we need the necessary resources to build a resilient climate future. This remains paramount and urgent. Despite the challenges caused by Cyclone Pam, I am pleased to announce that Vanuatu is currently recovering slowly. This year, the IMF and Asian Development Bank have projected that our economy will grow by just over 3% in 2016. This growth is underpinned by current public investments in major infrastructures and the expected recovery from our tourism sector. Another major source of growth is political stability. Last year we had elections and we now have a government that is stable and is committed to put Vanuatu back into a path of prosperity. The new government agreed to a 100-day plan that is both ambitious and realistic. Many of the initiatives in the plan have already been implemented, and some are currently debated. One such example is the introduction of new taxes to finance Vanuatu's sustainable development efforts. Many of our challenges in Vanuatu are also challenges that are faced by the Pacific Island countries. The common example is the climate change and the associated changes with weather pattern that emanates from it. Some of these common challenges are reflected in the current communique of the Forum Secretariat, a meeting that our minister attended with our Prime Minister. At the meeting, the leaders agreed, amongst other things, that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, strengthening Pacific resilience to climate change and disaster risk and Paris Agreement on climate change remain key frameworks for our sustainable future. Furthermore, at the meeting, oceans and fisheries, peace, gender equality, and human rights matters were also endorsed as important priorities for the region. It is also important to note that our Pacific challenges are not only limited to the Pacific region, but are also global challenges. This therefore means that it is very important that ever before that we work together. Our collective voice can be the conscience that not only goes to save the planet, but a voice that can save humanity. This is a big responsibility, but one that can be done and is also our strength. We have already demonstrated this, and we should not become complacent. Our collective journey has not yet ended. We also need to establish innovative partnerships, both bilateral and multilateral, that would assist us in investing in our sustainable future. To conclude, sir, and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all the Pacific Island countries, our development partners, and also the multilateral institutions that assisted Vanuatu in its recovery efforts. Happy Pacific Day, and thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Linney. So please join me, and we're going to segue now into the panel. So panel discussion, and we're going to call speakers to come up here in a minute. But please join me in giving another round of applause to the speeches for the leaders, the Pacific leaders who gave speeches here today. Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to call the panelists to come forward, please. I think most of you know who you are. From the IMF, Mr. Tao Zhang, the PIF General Secretary, Madam Meg Taylor, the Fiji Ambassador Solomara, the Director General of the Forum Fisheries Agency, James Movic, and so you can please come up, and the Director of the Family Violence and Sexual Assault Institute, Susanna T. Pula. Sorry. So yeah, you sit along there. I'll save this one. Yes. So maybe, perhaps while everybody's getting, maybe in the order that they're going to speak. So Mr. Zhang here, and then Meg Taylor. Dame Meg Taylor, and then Ambassador Solomara. So in the interest of time, while they're getting mic'd up, I'm going to briefly introduce each of the speakers. The first speaker on my immediate left is Mr. Tao Zhang, who is the Deputy Director, Managing Director at the IMF. He's pretty new in his job, but he's not new to Washington. Prior to coming to Washington, he served as Deputy Governor of the People's Bank of China. He's also been an IMF Executive Director for China from 2011 to 2015. He's also earlier worked at the World Bank and the Asia Development Bank. He has a PhD in International Economics from the University of California. Next to the next speaker is Dame Meg Taylor. She is the Pacific Island Forum Leader Secretary General and has held that post since August 2014. She received her legal training at Melbourne University in Australia, as well as from Harvard University in the US here. She served earlier as ambassador of Papua New Guinea to the United States. And in 2002, she was made Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. She's going to speak about regional integration and governance. And I should have mentioned that Mr. Tao Zhang is going to give a brief summary of the IMF book that's just been published, and I think many of you have it on your chairs. It's The Resilience and Growth in Small States of the Pacific. Mr. Ambassador, Fiji Ambassador Solomara is seated next. He has been Fiji, before coming to Washington late last year, he served as Fiji's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. He's also been ambassador to Germany, Ireland, Israel, and the Holy See. He joined the Foreign Ministry in 2000 and served as the permanent Foreign Secretary in 2008. The ambassador will speak about disaster response and resilience in response to Cyclone Winston. Next is James Movic, who is from the Federated States of Micronesia, where he's director of the Forum of Fisheries Agency. He has considerable experience in fisheries development and management and has served as president of various fishery organizations, including the National Fisheries Corporation. He's going to speak about best practices in fisheries management. And at the end of our row here is Susanna Tiapula, something like, sorry, I'm not very good at these names. She serves as the director of the Family Violence and Sexual Assault Institute in the Pacific International Division. She has she was born in the South Pacific, but has had various posts in the United States and other islands. She was a deputy prosecuting attorney in Hawaii. Earlier, she also served as Attorney General in American Samoa. She's served as Assistant Director of Rhetoric at, so it means you're a good speaker, right? At Pennsylvania State University, has also taught at Hawaii Pacific University and here locally at George Mason University. So with that, I'm going to turn to the speakers who are going to each give brief summaries, brief talks, and then we will open it up to discussion. So prepare your questions. Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Should I there?
If you want, or maybe it's easier just to stay seated because we're going to.
Oh, I see. Because I have a mic. Okay, good. Well, thank you. And thank you all, Excellencies and the Honorable Ministers and distinguished delegates and ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be here in this beautiful afternoon, like Mr. President just mentioned, and in particularly this lively setting and in front of the happiness, the happy faces all of you have. So I was told this is the annual event, and I wish I can, I hope I can come every year. This is my first year to be here, and so for that I'm very grateful for Ambassador Grosner inviting me, and also I'm grateful for David Gaston for organizing this wonderful event to make this happen. You know, the people may be wondering why IMF is invited to this event, and obvious reasons. We had a very close ties with the member countries in this region. There's no doubt about it. And we have 13, I think all of the 13 island economies, plus of course the Australia and New Zealand in this region as our members. And some of the fund interactions with these island economies can go back to more than 40 years ago. So no doubt about it, we place a very important in the relationship with these member economies. And of course, we spend quite a big amount of resources in these member countries. In terms of numbers, these economies pretty much make up our 1/3 of our resources in our Asian and Pacific Department. So it's very important to IMF, and I think equally important, the IMF is to these island economies. So I have to very happy to highlight that at the very beginning. And second, of course, due to the constraints of my time, I was told I only have 5 minutes. So I want to send out my message at the very beginning that I want to say this afternoon that we want to work together with the membership, with the Pacific Island economies to build the resilience through growth. This is our message. Or in other way, the growth is the best sources for resilience. And to elaborate more, I want to touch upon two aspects. One is I want to share with you how the IMF has been doing with our membership at the global level and including the Asia Pacific regions. And second, of course, in particular, how we're going to do for this part of the regions. And this is pretty much related to the book which the chair just mentioned it, the book in front of you, and I just want to elaborate a little bit more. So to begin with, how the fund has been doing with membership countries in terms of the building resilience through growth. And growth is the hot topic these days. Just recently completed the G20 summit. Growth once again is a hot topic. It's a main theme, and indeed from day one of the G20 summit, the G20 these global leaders have agreed that building a strong, balanced, and sustainable growth. And that was reiterated in the Australian summit, and aiming for a stronger growth. And again, this time around, the global leaders highlight that growth is the most important, on top of the priority of the agenda. So how to do it at the fund? We using our three main, so to speak, the ways to achieve it, to help the member countries to work with our partners. One is we provide surveillance and advisory services to our member countries through our Article 4 consultations, and of course through our capacity building services. And finally, of course, we provide financing help to those countries who need our help to get it fixed, their balance sheet and so forth. So that's applied to all our member countries. We actually did quite a lot of work for the Pacific Island economy as well. I just get into my job for less than 1 month, but I already chaired 4 Article 4 consultations for the countries in this region. So, so certainly the work has been going in this region and very intensively. And I was told we had very big regional training centers and in Fiji, and it's quite active, do the trainings for the regions and provide the hands-on capacity building services together with other development partners, particularly from the regions, including Australia and New Zealand. And of course, finally, we provide financing the facilities in a number of countries, and I was very glad to be told that the programs in a couple of countries, including the Vanuatu and I think the Solomon Islands and Samoa have been going on quite very well, and most of the program has been completed with the target. So these are the what we have been doing in this region in a very general remarks. Now, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on how we're going to go forward for this region in particular, because while we share the cross-country experiences, when we drawing from the other countries' experiences, we have to pay attention to the special circumstances in the region, and particularly to the country-specific circumstances in this region. Because even though the regions, the economy is small, shares commonalities, but each of them have their own specifics. So how are we going to do it? The approach is pretty much incorporated in the book. You just got it, and that is the result by quite a few number of our colleagues' work for a couple of years. Patricia is one of the authors here. There are three things I want to highlight it. One is, of course, the policy make differences. The policies which shape the pattern, the rhythm of the growth will make the difference. And so that's why we're paying very much importance to how to get the policy right. So that's, once with that in mind, our job is try to work with the member countries and the development partners to work on the policies, the microeconomic framework. This includes how to make the physical more sustainable, how to make the financial sector more sounder or healthier, and how can make the public and private partnership work more effectively. So all of these policies works. And also, in particular, as we know, the majority of these regions are so vulnerable to natural disasters or the climate change. So we are working with the member countries how to find or dig out the macro implications resulting from these natural disasters and the climate change. So that's one. And second, we have to keep our mind focused on growth. I don't want to elaborate more why and how growth make difference. And obviously, as you see, there are the difference in terms of growth rate in this region versus the other small states, or let alone the big neighbors in Asia Pacific. So we consider growth will make a difference, and we will try our best, working together with member countries and development partners, to raise up the growth potentials. And of course, the approach, I want to emphasize that there will be more sort of importance we will place on ex ante actions or measures compared with those ex post. When I say ex ante is before the shocks, including the natural disasters and climate change, hit the economies, we have to be ready in terms of the policy framework, planning, and make the infrastructures more resilient. Of course, all of these have the policy and financing implications, and we will work on it. And of course, on the export part, we will continue to work on infrastructure and also work on the regional or global financial safety net to make sure the insurance at will be there, available whenever needed at the regional and the global level. So I just very briefly touch upon what we're gonna do, what we want to do, and in the near term and in the medium terms. So once again, I thank you very much for inviting me and to join you this afternoon. And like I said, I hope I can come back again next year, and wish you have a pleasant day for the rest of this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Managing Director Zhao. We'll now shift to Dame Meg Taylor, please.
Greetings. May I please allow me to acknowledge the President of the Federated States of Micronesia, Ministers, Your Excellencies, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, and I see a lot of young faces there, which I'm delighted to see, and particularly those from the United States of America who have joined us. Let me just give you a picture of where we are in terms of the governance issues in the region. The Pacific Island Forum, the secretariat that I head, came into being in the early 70s. The first meeting actually was held in New Zealand in 1971. But the founding fathers were the leaders of the Pacific Islands from Samoa, Cook Islands, Nauru, Tonga, and of course from Fiji. And at the helm of those, the pioneers or the founding fathers was the formidable personality of Ratu Sukumasesemara of Fiji, who helped many of our other countries, like my own, Papua New Guinea, to find its feet and work towards self-determination. I just wanted to give you a sense of what I consider the three waves of Pacific regionalism that have occurred in our part of the world. And the early part of the history of our countries is that self-determination, self-government was imperative. In those days, in the 70s, the South Pacific Commission was the only organization that independent states could belong to. But they were precluded from discussing anything that was political or anything to do with their own economic independence. Hence, the formation of the early formation of the South Pacific Forum, and then this grew into the 80s. A second wave came through, and that was a greater focus on integration. Integration driven by the countries themselves because of globalization and a desire to be participating in the broader economy. But there was also very strong issues around nuclear-free Pacific and the kind of environment that the Pacific would be. The third wave has come to the Secretariat now, and I'm at the helm of this new change, is the framework for Pacific regionalism. In 2014, the leaders of the Pacific were very concerned about just the direction of the Secretariat itself and how decisions were made and the numbers of issues that would always come to leaders for decisions. The framework for Pacific regionalism is really more about the inclusiveness of our own people and a public policy process as one pillar of the decision-making or process of getting issues to the leaders. And that's what we've instituted. Every year, a call for submissions from right across the Pacific. People write in about the issues that they think are important that should be screened and then go to the leaders. The screening is not done by the Secretariat, it's done by representatives of Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia, civil society and private sector, and then those issues are then taken now through the layers of bureaucracy of the forum officials, then now we have the foreign ministers, and then finally to the leaders, and this is what happened last week in Ponape. What's the real difference of having this framework for Pacific regionalism? It's about the inclusion of people of the region, but it's really about changing who owns the decisions, the paradigm shift, that the leaders of the Pacific make those decisions, and then they tell the development partners, this is what we want for the region, and we expect you to come together and support us. We're in the second year of implementation. In 5 years, somebody will write a paper on it and look at it and say, well, you did a disastrous job, or you've made some progress. So that's where we are on the regionalism. It's very much a work in progress, and I know we will succeed. Let me just touch quickly on integration, which I've been asked to do so. It's, when you talk about anything that is of regional integration, it means you have to give up something of your own. And giving up some of your sovereignty is the biggest challenge that any nation has. So if we were to look across where we are now in the region and say, is this working on a regional basis? I would say that we're not there. But if you look at some of the integration that's happening at the sub-regional base level, and particularly around the Melanesian Spearhead Group, it is much more successful, very much in the economic area, with trade, access to each other's countries, etc. Micronesia has a grouping, and Polynesia has a grouping, and these will emerge. As the Secretary General of a regional organisation, am I threatened by that? Absolutely not. I think there are issues that can really work well at a sub-regional level, and others that really work well at a regional level, so there's integration. The emphasis in integration has always been much more around trade and economic issues. And if you look at the effort that was made with the European Union to negotiate the package, the Economic Partnership Agreement, which other ACP countries, Africa, Caribbean and Pacific, it took 10 years of negotiations with the Pacific and nothing came. It has now been suspended for 3 years, yet the Caribbean were able to do it and were successful in doing it. Now that the Cotonou Agreement with the European Union will what's the word? Expire, ministers prompting me, expire in 2020, the Pacific will have to really think about what it's going to do. There are trade agreements amongst ourselves, the PICTA, and now the current negotiation on the PACER Plus with Australia and New Zealand. But some of the bigger countries have stepped back, saying this is not in our own interest. So integration is, and from a regional perspective, is always a challenge. But if I may end on a positive note, where you see integration and the issues that the Pacific has done well in and will do well in and will continue, is on the climate issues. The leadership that was given by our leaders in Paris at COP21 was exemplary, of where everybody stood together. And then again in Turkey, in Istanbul for the World Humanitarian Summit, again. And then when it comes to oceans, as we move forward for the Oceans Conference next year, the leadership of the Pacific leaders will be noticeable, because it's not just about a big sea out there, it's about, that's them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dame Meg Taylor. Our next speaker is Fiji's Ambassador Solomara here in Washington. Ambassador Mara.
Are you right? Just speak into it.
Yes. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Isa Mbulabinaka. I've been asked today to speak on the issue of building resilience in a region prone to natural disaster and at the forefront of the impact of climate change, and use Fiji's experience on the tropical cyclone Winston to highlight some of the lessons learned and to share with us this evening. First, I just wish to convey my appreciation for the invitation to speak on this issue, just having arrived recently into Washington. But I'm honored to share this experience, given that 7 months ago, a Category 5 tropical cyclone named Winston cut a path of destructions across the Fiji Islands. With hurricane force winds measuring about 185 miles per hour, Winston was the strongest cyclone to ever hit the Pacific Islands region, and hopefully it will be the last. But it is the second strongest to ever make landfall in recorded history anywhere in the world. Typhoon Haiyan in 2013 remains the strongest, with registered winds of 190 miles per hour, which killed 6,000 plus in the Philippines. But Winston, moving in a very irregular manner in a westerly direction caused widespread damage across all 4 divisions of the Fiji group of more than 300 islands and affecting its whole population of 900,000 people. And coming at the back of a prolonged 6 months drought, the environment was just too fragile to withstand the onslaught of liters of rain and the hurricane force winds, particularly in the western areas of Fiji. It also meant that farms were already struggling to meet the demands of the market in that western parts of the Fijian islands. 40% of the country population were directly affected by hurricane force winds. An estimated 347,000 people, including 120,000 children, were directly affected. At least 265 schools were damaged, 63 were totally destroyed, and when school started this year, 188 schools were still closed. This represented about 7% of the schools in Fiji. Miraculously, only 44 people lost their lives, but close to 60,000 people were displaced from their homes and stayed in 1,000 evacuation centers around the country for a couple of months. And the total economic cost to Fiji was estimated at around $500 million US, or about 20% of our GDP. And due to this frequency of cyclones, particularly in Fiji, which is not new to cyclones, we have a very well-rehearsed disaster response procedure. The National Disaster Management Office is effectively mobilized soon after the threat of the cyclone is raised by the Met Office, and they work with local authorities to inform the public of any impending danger and organize evacuation centers to receive people who may be living in the impending disaster zone. And this is probably one of the main reasons why there were very few lives lost, because of the frequency of the cyclones we've had, which has led to the improvement of the response mechanism, particularly in trying to mobilize the communities in the path of any cyclone. But in the immediate aftermath of Winston, the National Disaster Management Office activated emergency response mechanism for the restoration of access, particularly the clearing of the main roads, reconnecting lines of communications, and restoring essential services such as supply of water and electricity. And one of the lessons that Fiji has learned very quickly, that in this age of mobile telephones, then once the mast started going down, it takes, the mobile telephones become very useless indeed. So we had to rely on satellite telephones that were flown in by international telecommunication organizations, and these were distributed out into the islands to reestablish immediate links with affected areas while the mobile telephone masts are being put up. And government rapidly began assessments with the assistance of military transport planes from Australia, New Zealand, and France. And all government agencies were coordinated through the Office of the National Disaster Control. And all international assistance that were coming in were coordinated under the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, or UN OCHA. And this helped quite a lot in giving clarity to the people at the decision-making level on the redistribution of aid to the areas where it is needed most. And one of the key important lessons that we've learned is the importance of a well-coordinated response infrastructure. And we cannot overemphasize the importance of this in building resilience on our islands and also responding to disasters. Because unfortunately, Cyclone Winston is a sign of things to come. And in order to strengthen our response, we need to learn from those that have gone before. And we in Fiji are a classic case where the island in the Pacific can learn from. What we have learned foremost is that we need to do more in the area of disaster preparedness. It is very important to incorporate and mainstream disaster preparedness into the national development strategies. It shouldn't be something that we run around and organize ourselves, when a cyclone has been identified by the Met Office. It is something that we should already be incorporating into our development strategies. Also, we have found that it is important to introduce and also enforce strict hurricane-proof building codes, particularly in rural areas where regulations are often ignored to save costs. And if you have seen some of the pictures coming out of the rural outer islands of Fiji, you would see concrete buildings either being blown down by strong winds or washed by tidal waves. And this is important in ensuring that we have strict adherence to hurricane-proof building codes in order to sustain these severe weather conditions that we are facing. And also it is important of government in rebuilding that we invest in building strong hurricane-proof community buildings and centers in safe locations that can be shelters during natural disaster period. Too often we designate church halls, school dining halls as evacuation centers. But most of these buildings are often built close to the shoreline because we want to enjoy the view of the ocean, that nice sea breeze. But during natural disasters, those locations can quickly turn against communities. And secondly, we need to develop a robust disaster response mechanism that can be mobilized within hours of a disaster to restore communications, provide urgent medical services, shelter, clothing. And in Fiji, through the assistance of the Red Cross, they often place these reserves of food and clothing in containers at the district level, which can become very useful in the first few hours after a disaster event, whilst communities are waiting for assistance from the central authorities. Again, this is something that has been learned from previous incidents of natural disasters, and where the Fiji Red Cross and the respective Fijian government agencies have been stockpiling relief supplies in outer islands and other district centers. One other issue that I wish to highlight as being important from the lessons learned from Winston is the importance of empowering community through knowledge, including by ensuring that school curriculums explores and explains the direct linkages between industrialization, CO2 emission, climate change, global warming, sea level rise, extreme and intense weather events, coastal erosion, for example. If these topics are addressed in schools, our children will grow up appreciating that the fragile environment in which we live needs to be looked after. And furthermore, more knowledgeable communities can encourage their leaders to carefully consider the negative environmental impacts of development projects, particularly in the mineral extraction industries, in forestries, and in fisheries, which are often provide scenarios that can exacerbate the impacts of natural disasters when they occur. And moving forward, we must also encourage the continued involvement of social partners in communities. In Fiji, we have found the roles of civil societies in engaging with village heads and citizens at the grassroots levels as being very important, because they have a crucial role to play in building resilient communities. They can create public awareness campaigns on disaster preparedness at the village level, and to help the population understand weather forecasts and its implications and the appropriate safety precautions that should be taken. And as I mentioned before, the small death toll of Winston can be, in some parts, be attributed to the active disaster preparedness workshops and seminars conducted by these NGOs, particularly the Fiji Red Cross, in the villages that were hit by the hurricanes. Some of these workshops were conducted just days before the cyclones. So the lessons were still fresh on the village headmen on their role in rescuing villages and advising villages and interpreting weather forecasts and advices that were being broadcast from the Central Division. I would also, at this stage, challenge really a rethink of our development model in the Pacific Island region, to take into account the severity of the climate conditions that we are facing. The development of coastal villages, towns and cities, and building infrastructure to service these settlements may need to be reconsidered in light of the impacts of climate change, coastal erosion, and sea level rise, and the growing intensity of hurricanes and tidal waves. For Fiji, it's quite a big challenge, really, given our biggest industry being tourism, and these are coastal infrastructure. And the challenge, really, of government participating with private sector in rethinking our development model will take courage with our political leaders in addressing. And finally, I would think that Pacific Island governments should invest in building strong economies and solid infrastructure that can support the nation in rebuilding and reconstruction after a natural disaster. Because we know that these disasters, these natural disaster events are coming, and the only way to prepare ourselves is to strengthen our economy and build solid infrastructure that can withstand the events like cyclones. With the representative from the IMF here with us, I wish also to highlight as the last point, really, is the important role of the international community, organization, and financing agencies in building and developing resilience in the Pacific Island region. Leading agencies like the World Bank and the IMF can make available funds for reconstruction at concessional rates based on vulnerability index rather than GDP. Because in Fiji's case, we have found that we cannot access these concessional facilities because we are a middle-income country. A label that is so misleading, because one weather event can completely wipe away your economy, as was the case in Vanuatu. So a reassessment probably within these institutions are important in order to assist us in developing that strong resilience in the Pacific Islands. I will leave it at that, MC, and proceed if there are further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mara. Our next speaker is James Movic of Federated States of Micronesia. Sir?
Thank you very much, moderator. My respect to ministers here present, ambassador, not on.
It's in your pocket.
All right, so can you hear me now? All right, so having made the salutations, moderator, 2 years ago I had the opportunity to address this same forum. And at that time, I urged Pacific Islanders and our friends here in Washington, D.C. to recognize the distinctive characteristics and the significant accomplishments of Pacific Island tuna fisheries management, including the fight against IUU and achieving economic benefits from the tuna resources with which our region is blessed. I'd like to use this short opportunity to update you on those achievements and to raise a few new thoughts. And I'll do this by reading through this prepared script. I don't normally do that, but I think this might be a more efficient way to move forward. With regard to fisheries management, we note that 3 of the 4 key tuna species that are economically important to Pacific Island countries are within sound fishing management parameters. These are skipjack, yellowfin, and albacore tuna. And the region, led by the P&A Vessel Day Scheme members, for whom the skipjack and purseine fisheries are especially important, has taken steps to set a target reference point for the skipjack fishery, which will retain that fishery within sound resource and economic management limits. Effective management measures is able to be adopted relatively easily due to the fact that most of the skipjack fishery is located within the exclusive economic zones of Pacific Island countries. The inability to secure albacore, a soon arrangement for albacore tuna longline fishery within the Regional Fisheries Management Organization, or the Western Central Pacific Commission, has prompted FFA member countries to agree to adopt binding catch limits for southern albacore tuna in their exclusive economic zones within the Tokelau arrangement. And we hope to conclude that binding arrangement this year with a view to thereupon calling on the WCPFC to adopt compatible measures for the high seas. Now, we are more confident of securing sound bioeconomic fisheries management measures for these 2 fisheries because a large proportion of the catch, more than 70%, is taken within the PIC EEZs. However, this degree of confidence is not quite as assured with regard to management of yellowfin tuna, and certainly does not extend to the 4th tuna stock of Big Eye. This is due to the as yet unresolved conflicts between the bioeconomic objectives for the purseine and the longline fisheries that both target these stocks. The relative economic benefits of these 2 fisheries are different for the PICs and for distant water fishing parties, and PICs are especially sensitive to the disproportionate burden of fishing management that is falling on their shoulders. The level of this fishing that takes place on the high seas and the relatively lower level of management rigor and accountability imposed on the longline fishery generally are significant challenges in the search for effective management measures that will assure the early recovery of the now overfished big-eyed tuna stocks. Now, these ongoing management challenges have given rise to much criticism of regional tuna fisheries management organizations and supported calls by some, such as in the United Nations BBNJ PrepCon process, for high seas fisheries to be managed through global mechanisms. For the PICs, however, the question that arises is this: if we have not been able to achieve sound consensus within the regional WCPFC, where at least the parties have a degree of real common fishery interest, how can we be assured that this can be achieved through a global mechanism where interests are much more diverse, the degree of common interest is less, and the challenge of reaching consensus is even more daunting? Can we use these processes instead to improve decision-making processes in the RFMO instead? Personally, it does seem to me that given the clear success of coastal state zone-based management arrangements, such as we have in the amongst Pacific Island countries in the WCPO, greater consideration should be given to coastal state management of enclosed, substantially enclosed, and adjacent high seas areas, or however we can define them, or to closure of high seas areas for conservation management of highly migratory species, albeit taking care to mitigate any disproportionate burden for affected Pacific Island country developing states. Now, turning to the fight against IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing that I raised when I was here, I'm now in a much better position to give you some hard data and some hard facts about the nature of this fishery. I did say 2 years ago that sometimes it seemed we were beating ourselves too much over our own heads in not recognizing the success that we had actually achieved. Now, to back up those words, an independent analysis of IUU in the Pacific Islands region, that is the Western and Central Pacific Ocean, not including Philippines and Indonesia, was undertaken. It took 2 years to complete. It was published in February this year, and a copy of that is available online at the FFA website for those of you who might be interested. As a headline reference, earlier top-down estimates of IUU fishing in the Western Central Pacific had suggested that IUU activity was in the range of 707 to 1.5 billion US dollars. However, based on the best available operational data, as found in the study, the quantum of fishing formerly defined as being IUU is now more definitively considered to be in the range of 276,000 to 338,000 metric tons, with a best estimate point of 306,000 metric tons, valued at $616 million. More importantly, however, the report clarifies some very vexing questions regarding the nature of IUU fishing within the WCPO region. It finds that the amount of fishing attributed to actual illegal, unlicensed fishing activity is less than 4% of that total, and that rather the vast bulk of IUU activity, 54%, is comprised of reporting violations by licensed fishing vessels. It also finds that a significant 13% is attributable to post-harvest risks, mostly arising from our inability to secure independent and reliable verification of catches that are transshipped in the high seas or in ports outside of the region. For Pacific Island countries concerned with the economic loss, or the actual economic loss from this resource, the report estimates that the lost economic rent that might otherwise have been extracted through fishing fees from this level of IUU fishing is around $153 million, and advises that even that is likely to be on the high side of the estimate. Now, while still high, this imputed financial loss to PICs is significantly less than the earlier conjectures of being around $3 billion being stolen from us in the Western Central Pacific, which had earlier caused so much breastbeating and lack of confidence in the region. Clearly, this analysis now identifies the regional IUU problems more accurately, and that will enable us to target the fight against IUU far more effectively. And we are beginning to undertake measures to that effect. The effectiveness of the IUU battle and of the overall monitoring, control, and surveillance framework utilized by FFA and member countries was reviewed by representative ministers of Fisheries, Finance, Foreign Affairs, and Law Enforcement in conjunction with the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. And I'm pleased to say that at the 47th Pacific Island Forum held in Pohnpei just last week, Pacific leaders endorsed that review and concurred that the combination of MCS tools, programs, assets, and activities at the national and regional levels represent a world-class MCS framework that has achieved significant positive results for FFA members. I'll just skip some of what I had in terms of detailed measures that we will have taking forward, but I did want to make a clear point here, and I'm sorry I'm using this device, which is rather okay, the regional MCS framework is an outstanding example of the effectiveness of regional cooperation. The individual sovereign efforts of member states is significantly enhanced and expanded by this cooperation framework. Through the Niue Treaty Subsidiary Agreement, our members' commitment and capability to cooperate even more closely and effectively to extend their jurisdictional capability beyond the reach of their physical assets and their exclusive economic zones will be even further enhanced. For these reasons, the key message that I want to give to outside parties wishing to assist Pacific Island states and the region in this regard is to work with the existing regional infrastructure that FFA supports. This is the framework that is owned by the Pacific Island countries, is closely integrated into national processes, including regulatory and judicial, and enables significant value-added effectiveness at the regional level. At the FFA Secretariat, we are willing to work cooperatively with all prospective partners where there are clear benefits to our members. Now finally, I would just like to touch on one perhaps rather more contentious subject, but nevertheless an issue that I feel I am compelled to address as Director General of the agency that is charged to assist members to cooperate in their tuna management efforts to maximize and enhance the economic benefits that they can derive from their tuna resources. This is the issue of supportive measures that might be adopted by the international community to augment the marine protected and marine and managed area arrangements that are aimed at oceanic resources and habitats beyond the coastal environment that are being increasingly adopted by Pacific Island countries in their exclusive economic zones. The conservation of highly migratory species through MPAs and MMAs is unlikely to be effective without other management measures that specifically address reduction in catch and effort. Tuna and other highly migratory species migrate. As Pacific Island countries and others in the Pacific enclose even greater proportions of their exclusive economic zones, we are seeing and will expect more movement of fishing effort into adjacent high seas. As noted earlier, the rules of fishing in high seas are not as rigorous and vigorously applied as within exclusive economic zones. This has implications for stock conservation. But just as importantly for Pacific Island countries, that relocation of fishing from exclusive economic zones to high seas reduces the income that Pacific Island countries earn from their tuna resources. The issue of the economic impact of high seas fishing on PICs should not be discounted, for these small nations have few alternative sustainable resources to underpin their economic development. Fishing access revenues bring in close to $370 million per year to the region, and fishing revenues comprise more than 50% of government revenues in at least 5 Pacific Island country members, in some cases exceeding 70%. Within substitution constraints, the reduction of high seas fishing would enable Pacific Island countries to increase fishing access fees charged in their EEZs to offset the diminishing zone value arising from area closures. Moreover, the international community should support measures that would enable Pacific Island countries to extract a higher value from the tuna resources from value addition. By this, I don't just mean investment to enable Pacific Island countries to catch more of the tuna or to process more of the fish within the region, although that would be helpful. However, what I'm referring here are to ways to enhance product and market value, to transform tuna from being a rather boring, low-end, low-value canned commodity product to higher value products for which consumers would be willing to pay more. As one prominent international businessman challenged me not too long ago, why can't we call for consumers to pay more for this product in order to support the sound conservation, not only of the tuna resource, but also of the people who depend upon this resource? After all, it is a product consumed primarily by middle class and upper middle class consumers in developed countries who increasingly call for conservation of the resources, but are all too often unwilling to contribute to that through paying a fairer price for this magnificent fish. This may run counter to market logic, but I think it is still a fair question to pose to those same consumers and developed country stakeholders who unfortunately still seem to expect Pacific Islanders to continue to shoulder a disproportionate burden for conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Movic. Our next speaker is Susanna Tiapula. Sorry if I keep messing it up, but please, looking forward to your comments.
Talofalava. Aloha, Yokwe, Rananim, Ali'i, Hafade, Kia ora, Pakalofa, Kia orana. Welcome to our President Christian from Micronesia, our distinguished Samoan leaders, excellencies, and those of you in the back. Thank you for coming, and I understand I am the only thing standing between you and a wonderful show. I promise you I'll make it worth your while. I struggled when I first looked at the agenda as to how to frame gender-based violence and an event where we are primarily focusing on today the establishment of this incredible marine sanctuary. And I realized as I listened to the many speakers and I spoke to many of you before this event that I don't have to frame it. This is not a zero-sum society. We don't live single-issue lives, and this is not zero-sum. I actually believe that gender-based violence belongs in this room, and in this room because. Do you remember that beautiful image that we heard a few moments ago? Aren't we turning the Titanic with an oar? If you are the group that has the capacity to turn the Titanic with an oar, then you are the group that will be able to address gender-based violence in our region. We are in the right place at the right time. Gender-based violence is a historic and a universal issue, but I am going to try to frame it for us in the Pacific. I ask you to consider how the silos and the boundaries in our region inhibit our ability to work. And I struggled with the word inhibit. I wanted to say something positive. The silos help us because they allow us to bring expertise to the problem, to an issue. But for the most part, our silos limit our capacity to address problems and to build healthier, stronger communities. I'm going to talk about our political boundaries. The fact that I have 16 nations here, there are many Pacific Island communities that are not at the table. Okay. The reality of travel in the Pacific and the expense of travel in the Pacific is that we cannot afford to learn from each other. So for those of you that represent international funding in this room, the people of American Samoa would like to learn from the women of the Marshall Islands, who aggressively challenged domestic violence incidents in their countries. Human trafficking, frontline professionals would like to look to what's happening in the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam and tap into some of that expertise. The women of the Cook Islands are focused on health. We'd like to look at current research around adverse child experiences, what we know around girls who experience gender-based violence. So a child that is sexually abused is 28 times more likely to be sold for sex in their lives. 28 times. We have research that if a child observes domestic violence, just watches it, okay, if they have a certain number of impacts later in their life, they will have specific health consequences, higher rates of diabetes, higher exposure to cancers, higher vulnerability to obesity. Does this sound familiar to any of our health professionals in the room? And yet we don't talk as a region around trauma. Gender-based violence is also perpetuated by cultural beliefs and norms that are based on the devaluation of women and children. It's experienced in the context of other aspects of our identity, race, socioeconomic status, class, the type of job that a woman or a child does, disability, legal status within the country, gender identity, sexual orientation. All of those affect how we experience gender-based violence. And gender-based violence employs a constellation of physical, sexual, economic, and emotional abuse that can create a climate of fear and result in physical and psychological injuries. The accompanying harm for women and girls are that they bear the burdens of shame, humiliation, and victim blaming. I would submit that almost half of the rape cases that I have prosecuted in my life were not brought to my office or were not initially identified as rape or sexual assault. They were initially identified as assault, usually because someone, either within the family or the community, was beating the victim because she was seen as being at fault. So I would get a call from hospitals because they had an assault case. A woman had been beaten, a child had been beaten because she was blamed by her family for the sexual assault that she experienced. I realize that we have been here for a long time. I don't come with just statistics, and the statistics in our region are troubling. Of the 14 South Pacific Forum nations for which I have data, 7 have more than 50% of the female population having experienced intimate partner or domestic violence in their life. And several of our countries have rates of almost 68% for intimate partner violence. Our capacity to even begin to discuss sexual assault is really limited. We have issues of language. In several of the Pacific countries that I've worked, I have been approached by women and women's organizations asking me and asking for discourse. How do we establish community discourse when talking about that is difficult in group settings? How do we do that? How do we create healthy conversations at the community level when it is very uncomfortable for us as a people? From a practical standpoint, I would suggest that we look at our community-based strengths. We have women's organizations in the Pacific that are powerful. We have traditional organizations, and I would point to our Samoan men, our young men's organizations, the Aumanga. The Aumanga are groups of men that work at the village level that address village problems. Many of our Aumanga in both American Samoa and Samoa are willing to address intimate partner violence and do so articulately and with power. We should be focusing on our successes. We had that wonderful example of how do we find the successes. We should look at our successes and build on those and create opportunities for individual women and communities in the Pacific to learn from each other. We talk about gender-based violence as if it's something that others experience. And we've talked a lot today about resources, the need for our Pacific resource. And I love everything around the ocean. My father was a fisherman. I grew up as a child and a teen going out at night spearfishing. I think there might now be a labor analysis. But at the time, I was simply proud that my family ate the fish that I caught. But I also grew up in a family that was unique because my father allowed me to fish. I was actually taken out, and many other girl children don't get to experience that. I was included in my family's effort to provide food. It created a sense of identity. We talk about identity. I know you've struggled with the name Tiapula. Tiapula is a piece of land. My family has lived on that piece of land for almost 3,000 years. It is a physical entity, it is a thing, and I am part of that thing. Our women and girls are part of this space. Just as the ocean is a part of who we are, our women and girls are part of our space. We create healthy, dynamic communities. Healthy, dynamic communities. So that there are people and communities that can enjoy that incredible ocean that we are preserving. I throw that out to you as you go off to enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tiapula. So we have 10 minutes or so until we're going to get entertained. So I'd like to entertain a few questions from the audience. You no doubt have some questions for our speakers. So if you want to raise your hand, I'll identify you. David, do we have microphones? Okay, so if you raise your hand, we will get a microphone over to you and then get our speakers to answer your question. Do you want? Please, Mr.
First, thank you all very much for this very constructive and refreshing and also illuminating discussions on a wide range of issues. I want to make one comment and then also ask another one question. And the comment is that the issue of fragile states. I think the definition needs to be extended so that we look at the vulnerability of small island communities like the Pacific Islands in relation to the impacts of climate change. I think PNG made a representation on that. I'm sure that it is reflected in the documents and or the communique for the PIF outcomes, the World Bank and the IMF needs to ensure that the definition is extended to include countries in the context of the presentation made by Fiji, so that it's not necessarily the traditional fragile states per se, but those who are affected by the impacts of climate change should be looked at, because we have refugees physically around the Pacific who are affected by natural disasters. That's a comment. The question is that in relation to funding from institutions such as the World Bank or the IMF, there is a need for collaborative partnership, and our Secretary General was talking about the concept, the framework for Pacific regionalism, which all the PIF countries are working to implement. But in terms of resilience and adaptation on the impacts of climate change, is there an opportunity for partnership with the World Bank or the IMF where there is a opportunity for collaboration between traditional methods of resilience and adaptation by mixing them with a relevant mix of modern techniques? Is there an opportunity for investment from the IMF or the World Bank there? Could it be done through the Pacific Regionalism Initiative or the Oceans Commission, which the PIF countries have established, or is that something that we can only pursue bilaterally? Thank you.
It's a good question. I don't think any of us have got the right answer.
Mr. Zhao, did you want to answer?
Should I one more or
Maybe we should take one more question. Is there another one out there, sir?
Thank you. My question is directed to the FFA Director General regarding U.S. decision to pull out of the treaty early this year. I would like to know what is FFA's position on that. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we answer these, and if we keep our answers short, maybe we have a chance for another question or two.
Oh, okay, it's working. So resilience. Well, first of all, Minister, thank you for your very good questions. Fragile states, you heard about it in the document and so forth. And certainly, I think the concept can be evolving. Compared with other concepts, for example, developing countries, advanced countries, emerging markets. These are more mature concepts. And even for those mature concepts, I think we are at the fund for some period of time. We have periodical review what these concepts really means, scope and so forth. I certainly applied for the discussions on these what we really means by fragile state. Certainly, of course, when we develop these concepts, we will discuss with our partners like World Bank and of course with the members. So I think I very much support your ideas of whether or not to give a window to have a further substance in over either expansion or further meaning. I mean, the additional meaning to these concepts. That's I think I very much support the initiatives to get into the discussion. Second, your proposals on whether or not we should work on initiative with the World Bank or other developed partners on how these can be sort of make it further internalize the bilateral initiatives. I think that's a suggestion worth the way exploring back home. Like I said in the earlier remarks, our approach at the fund, of course, we play our role in collaboration with our other partners. Our role is, at this moment, we very much emphasize on the ex-ante arrangement in terms of the policies, schemes, planning, preparedness, these type of things. And of course, in terms of financing arrangements, we also are very interested in building up the financial safety net. And if any of these efforts can contribute it to the initiative we just mentioned, I think we are very positive in that towards that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Movik, can you answer the fish question?
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. All right. The question was a position on the current U.S. position where it has not yet withdrawn the notice of withdrawal from the U.S. treaty. As you know, the U.S. treaty was negotiated. The terms were agreed in principle by the two sides. There has been a subsequent legal scrubbing exercise that was undertaken in Hawaii 2 weeks ago. The result of that is now being circulated amongst the Pacific Island member countries for their review and concurrence. We do expect, based on the feedback we've received from officials within the U.S. State Department, that the Secretary of State will rescind the notice of withdrawal as soon as the scrub text is received on their side. So we look forward to that. I think if I could just make one final comment, and it's to note the comment made by the Minister from Marshall Islands. We do certainly hope, while we are being patient, we do hope that the U.S. will take this action formally sooner the better, because it does affect the capability of the Pacific Island countries that are members of the Vessel Day Scheme to continue to hold off on the days that they are setting aside for the U.S. now. If the U.S. does not proceed with the treaty, and these countries are then forced to sell this on the open market, they would face very serious financial consequences. So we do hope for an early rescission.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I see other hands up, but unfortunately, we're getting the signal that we're going to segue into the final stage of our seminar here, which is going to include a performance by Cameron McCurdy. So the organizers of this event ask us all to move out there to watch the performance. But before we do that, please join me in thanking the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.